100 episodes of the Business Emergency Room podcast. And across all of them, the turnarounds, the collapses, the fraud cases, the leadership failures, the partnerships that erode quietly, the boards that stopped asking hard questions, I keep seeing the same thing. And it's not the crisis or the emergency itself. What I see is what came before it. There were signals there. The challenge is nobody was reading them. Or maybe people were reading them but didn't feel allowed to name them. 100 episodes of a podcast, I definitely feel pride and I am celebrating for sure. But I'll be celebrating offline because this episode is not going to be a celebration episode. This is a working episode. As always, I want to give you value. I want to give you some tips and tricks that you can use in your business today. I am going to give you 8 vital signs. 8 things your organization should be monitoring right now. 8 things or vital signs that most leaders are not paying attention to. So whether you are taking these back to go ask some questions in your organization or to set up some full spread monitoring, I'm going to tell you by the end of this episode what you can do to progress these further if you cannot answer honestly the questions I'm going to ask you. Let's go. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. In medicine, vital signs are the basics. Things like heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, oxygen. They do not tell you everything, but they do tell you whether to worry. When you miss them, you miss the window. Organizations have vital signs too, and they're not on a monitor because nobody's checking them on a schedule. And unlike a hospital, nobody walks in every 4 hours to take a reading. What I have learned from a couple of decades working into organizations in trouble is that the signals were almost always there, months before, sometimes years. They were just not being read or monitored. Today, I'm sharing these 8, and I'm going to use voices from across 100 episodes of this show, guests, and some of my own frameworks, because the patterns I'm describing are definitely not mine alone. They show up everywhere, in every industry, at every scale, in organizations that look pretty okay from the outside. So, here are your 8 vital signs. Vital sign number 1, heroics. Ask yourself, are there individuals in your organization who are constantly saving the day? Because that is what really heroics is, right? That's not a sign of strength. They are a system failure wearing a cape. When Brent Hagan and I talked about supply chain resilience, he named this directly.
Everyone has like those code red moments of like, hey, stuff's really getting ready to hit the fan, and we have these key signals. I think the difference is between are we going to recover or are we going to collapse is whether you rely on people to get their way out of it, which is what this company decided to do, at least for the short term, or how can we build systems in place on the front end to be the shock absorber and avoid these diving catches that so many of us who work in operations have become just really, really great at over time because we've had to.
Brent was talking about supply chains, but I want you to hear that in every part of your organization. Finance, sales, operations, leadership itself. If the same people are always running to the rescue, you do not have a strong team. You have a fragile system held together by individuals who will eventually burn out, leave, or get sick. And the day one of them is not there, you will find out what is actually underneath. So the question is not who your heroes are. The question is, do you have them? And why do you still need them? Vital sign number 2, friction. And I mean a very specific kind of friction. Not conflict, not tension. I mean, how much of your organization's energy is going into figuring out how to do the work rather than actually doing the work? Outdated processes, nobody designed intentionally, but everybody works around, or approval chains that made sense 3 years ago and are now just too cumbersome. Do you have meetings about meetings? Do you have workarounds that became permanent? Have you outsourced part of the work and the interfaces are 3 years in, still not really working because you're on different systems, on different languages, on different, name it. I did an episode on process decay that put a number on this. And organizations really lose 20 or 30% of annual revenue to inefficient ways of working. And the brutal thing is that it's invisible, and that apart from the financial number, this is what creates and breeds frustration and inefficiency and switching off in your team and in your people. Because nobody looks at it as a line item, but it shows up as exhaustion and slowness and the constant feeling that things are harder than they should be. I had a good conversation about this with Joe Bockerstette, who had spent over 30 years mapping business processes. And something that he said stayed with me.
Most of the outcomes of poor process management come from inefficient execution, unhappy customers. Of course, profitability isn't what we desire. We have different people doing the same things different ways, right? We don't have an understanding of exactly what we're trying to accomplish at our value proposition, both externally and internally. And so the organization is misaligned throughout the different departments relative to what we're trying to accomplish with the end customer and in the marketplace. But you can't apply technology without the thoughtfulness on top of it, right? Otherwise, you're just automating more chaos and more dissatisfaction quicker, whatever it may be. That's why so many software systems aren't used well today, because they're not lined up with who's my customer, what deliverable delights them, what's the best way to go about producing that deliverable.
The question for you is simple. When did you last look at how work actually moves through your organization? When did you last had a conversation with your people where inefficiencies in the system have mounted to the level of daily frustration? The example I gave you, or the analog I gave you when I talked about process decay, is one that I think as a mom of 3 teenagers is very logic, and maybe many of you will recognize, is the challenge or the situation around a code rack. To me, a good process is like a code rack. It's not necessarily very prescriptive, and it also is not universal looking, yet somehow everybody understands how to use it. As an example, when you come into a house where you have never been, the code rack could look more like a mudroom, hooks on a wall, or an actual stand. But by the code rack, there is usually also shoe trays and places for bags and places for umbrellas, whatever. So you come into a space you don't know, or you've been invited in, and you enter, and you see that code rack there. From the way the situation is configured, you will take your cues, and it will cost you no thinking power to know whether you keep your shoes on or off, where to leave your jacket, where others have left their bags, etc. If you come into a house you've never been before, and the code rack is absolutely overflowing, or you do not find a code rack, but you do have a bag and a wet rain jacket or something else, you are going to find a place to leave it. And everybody who comes in after you might follow your lead or choose a different place. And suddenly you have chaos. And everybody has to put effort into, where do I leave this? What do I not do? Everybody is uncertain, and everybody's a little bit like, I don't know these people so well. What do I do with it? That's what happens with process decay, right? It creates inefficiency, and it puts energy into stuff that's not needed. So, when is the last time that you named the inefficiencies in the system and created some space to solve them rather than live with them. Vital sign 3, avoided conversations. I'm not talking about whether your organization has the difficult conversations. I'm talking more specifically about how long have they been postponed. I've done a couple of full episodes on this subject because it keeps coming up in every triage, in every turnaround, in every exit that went sideways. There was always conversations that needed to happen 6 months earlier or sometimes 2 years earlier. And the thing is, we all know it, right? What I have found is that the avoidance is almost never malicious. And in my conversation with Emma Collyer, she made this point when we talked. And I think she described it very eloquently.
Well, the hesitation to give constructive feedback, as we would call it, is the reaction of the other person because they're concerned about upsetting somebody, or maybe it's been taken the wrong way. And what happens if it impacts the relationship that we have right now? Because it's good and I don't want to affect it. So I don't really want to have that difficult conversation because something might happen after that. So instead of digging in, there's an avoidance.
Yeah, and it's so amazing, right? Because the first word that comes to mind that when you say that is care. It means that actually, if I hear you say that somebody's coming from a place of care.
The good intention is there and people really want to do a good job as managers and leaders. But there is this kind of holding back of providing that information that is either going to help somebody improve or is going to increase performance for that individual, purely because they're concerned about what happens at the end of this conversation, or I don't know how to deal with it.
The 5 conversations I see organizations avoid most consistently are 1, underperformance in a long tenured employee or in a specific part of the business. 2, not having the conversations about a partnership that has run its course. 3, not having the conversation about a leadership role that has outgrown its occupant. No longer the right fit in the right role. 4, conversation about a strategic direction nobody believes in anymore. The headline does no longer fit. The jacket no longer fits us or what we're truly doing. And last but not least, the conversations about accountability at the very top. If any of this made you uncomfortable just now, that discomfort is information. Deep down, we all know that there's conversations we should have had by now, and we haven't had. Can you just name one? Or can you name kind of too many? Vital sign number 4. I call it the last outsider. When did someone with genuinely no stake in the answer last look properly at your organization? Or when was the last time that you happily welcomed an outsider in? I'm not talking about an auditor checking compliance or a consultant selling a solution. Someone who truly came in and looked at what was actually there and told you what they saw without filtering it for your comfort. Elisabeth Vealey has spent decades doing exactly this, walking into struggling companies and following the cash to find out what's really happening. And she said something in our conversation that I think is a very important thing that I heard on this subject.
When I come into a company, I'm following the cash. I'm following the cash in and the cash out. And I'm seeing why the cash is not coming in faster and why it's not going out slower. So once you dive into that deep of a analysis, I guess, of the money, things just happen, right? Like you start walking down the hallway and you find the different closets with the skeletons in them. I think a good leader knows when it's time to bring in some outside help. You're not giving over the reins. You're not changing anything. It's not saying you failed. It's just simply you're actually very intelligent and you realize that maybe some of the skill sets that got you where you are not the same that's going to get you to the next level. You're not going anywhere, right? But I think it's time to bring in some fresh eyes and take a look.
Misread, not hidden. The information is usually there. It's just the interpretation that's wrong. Yeah. Again, not malicious, but misread. And here's what it makes it structural rather than personal. In my conversation with Dr. Sumit Chowdhury, who builds network intelligence platforms and works with organizations globally, and is actually an expert in chaos theory, explained why insiders cannot see, but outsiders can, even when they're smart and experienced and paying attention.
So technologically, we can create social networks, intranets, and explicit situations inside, but that will not solve the crisis situation. It can solve the day-to-day mundane 60%. Crisis is hard times are 30%, crisis is 10%. I said business as usual 60%, hard times is 30%, and crisis is 10%. If you don't have that ratio, I think you're doing too casual a job.
You cannot read the label from inside the jar. And that's not a weakness, that's just physics. The question is not whether you are smart enough to see your own blind spots, because nobody is. The question is when you last invited someone in who could, and whether you'd be willing to invite somebody in today. Vital sign number 5. Numbers versus the story. Where do they stop matching? Every organization has a narrative about itself. We are growing, we are profitable, or we're just going through some temporary upheaval. Our clients love us, our team is strong, we're the best in X, Y, and Z. And every one of those narratives has a number somewhere that either confirms it or quietly contradicts it. Or sometimes it can only be backed up by the numbers from last year. Because what was true then may no longer be true today. Ryan Garghan is a fractional CFO and an exit planning advisor, and he works with small to medium-sized companies, and he sees this gap between what leaders believe about their business and what the numbers actually show constantly.
Are the books being closed on a consistent manner, right? Are our bills being paid on a consistent manner? And more importantly, having a positive cash flow attitude is, are our customers paying us on a consistent manner, right? So we want consistency in the fact that our procedures, our controls, our systems are in place, because that's what consistency is all about, right? Is that you have something and it's followed by all. So if you have a Big Mac and you buy it in Amsterdam or you buy it in Paris, right? It's the same Big Mac. We want that procedure to go on. And that's also true to the financials, because when there isn't consistency, something's going on there. Someone's not doing their job, or something's being hidden, right? Something's not being talked about, which I think goes to the second one, is that, are we getting straightforward answers, right? When we're looking at our P&Ls, or we're looking at our balance sheets, or we're looking at just having conversations with the people in finance, are they being truthful, or are they giving us jargon? So 75% of exits, by the way, are based upon disease, disability, divorce, death, those kind of things, right? We call them the 5 Ds. Unfortunately. And those are the unplanned events where actually people leave value on the table because they haven't planned accordingly.
Ryan named death, disability, divorce, disagreements, and distress are the things that force an exit before anyone is ready. And in almost every case, the financial picture that emerges in that moment is different from the picture the owner was carrying in their head. And you do not need to be in a crisis for this to matter. The gap between your story and your number is always worth closing. The thing is, our brains are amazing at fooling ourselves, but somewhere we also know. So the question to ask yourself and the question to ask your organization, what is the beat we still keep drumming, right? What is the thing that we believe we are? And are our numbers still truly backing this up? Or are these things starting to diverge? And does our narrative no longer hold true? That's a conversation worth having. Which brings me to vital sign number 6, board silence. Your governance structure is not pushing back, and why? This is not just for organizations with formal boards. This applies to any leadership structure where there are people whose job it is to ask the hard questions. So whether you have an advisory board, whether you have senior leadership teams, whether you have investor relationships, the people who are supposed to be the check on the people running the show, have they gone silent? Dr. Keith Dorsey and we talked about this. He has spent his career studying board effectiveness and what makes governance actually work. And his point was quite blunt. A culture of inquiry. That phrase is doing a lot of work. Because what I see most often is not a board that disagrees and stays quiet. It's a board that has stopped knowing what questions to ask. The business has moved on. The complexity has grown, and the governance structure has not kept up. Silence in the boardroom does not mean agreement. It often means the people in the room no longer feel equipped to challenge what they are hearing. They no longer know what questions to ask. And that's a vital sign worth taking very seriously. Vital sign 7, partnership health. When did the senior leaders on both sides of your most important external relationship last sit down together and speak with real candor? I am talking about the partnerships or the relationships that can make or break your business. When did senior representatives from both sides last had an actual true conversation, a genuine conversation, not an operational update, not a contract review, a genuine conversation about whether the partnership is still working, whether the original value exchange still makes sense, and whether there are things neither side is saying out loud and maybe need attention. I called this the gin and tonic test in an earlier episode. And the idea is very simple. If you cannot sit across from your strategic partner, relax, and have an honest conversation about what is working and what is not, the partnership is already in trouble. And the question is just how much trouble? The gin and tonic set is the senior leaders who do not need to talk all the time and are not directly involved in the work. They are the escalation level, right? The ones that do not suffer some of the daily frustrations or are still busy with something that happened last week. The ones who can take all these inputs from both sides of the relationship and bring that up and have the right conversation about what in there might need some attention or some work. Partnerships do not usually explode. They erode slowly through small compromises and deferred conversations and the gradual replacement of candor with politeness or just operating on a transactional basis only. So who owns the relationship at your company? And is there some sort of escalation levels, right? When did they last have that conversation? And do you feel if that your verdict about how this relationship is doing, would that answer on the other side of the table match yours? Important question to ask yourself. Vital sign number 8, last but not least, the dead bodies. What does everyone in your organization know, but nobody names out loud? What does everyone in your organization know, but nobody names out loud? Every organization has them. And are they small, funny jokes or, little insider things? Or are these actually significant skeletons? I've never walked into an organization that didn't have any of them. The organizations I run into that are actually in dysfunction, right, or in a business emergency, there is too many of them. And everybody knows where they are. Yet, we left them in the closet. The question is whether the culture makes it possible to surface them before they become the reason that everything falls apart. Holli Moeini is a CFO and an M&A advisor who has spent 30 years finding what hides inside organizations, particularly in the financial due diligence process around mergers and acquisitions. And she named this better than I just did.
Somebody always knew something. And so in one of my jobs, I was the controller at the time. I wasn't the CFO, but it was the president's daughter stealing. Now she was the director of HR. That makes no sense. And it started small. It became hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we had great control. So again, I want to shock you that it's the grandma that you knew forever doing the books that shows up with the new Mercedes every year and nobody asks why, So I want to shock you. So having curiosity in your workplace, a culture where you ask questions. So you want people to raise the flag. In every case, somebody knew something that could have questioned it and found it quicker, because it's not whether it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen.
Someone always notices it first. That line has stayed with me. Holli was talking about financial dead bodies, the fraud, the leakage, the missing millions that show up when somebody finally looks close enough. But I want to extend that. Dead bodies can also look like incomplete system implementations, things that didn't get finished and everybody is working around. I had an example in one of the episodes where I talked about that we were automating EDI vendor contracts, right? Or basically implementing e-procurement for high volume contracts. And the resistance was insane until we realized that due to all these global systems put in place about how contracting was supposed to work, the guys offshore on the oil platforms got so frustrated trying to order through the standard catalogs that were set up that they were using a back entry on these contracts. They were using a back entry on existing contracts that basically said, this contractor will buy anything for you and just mark it up by 10%. Well, of course, that is much easier than saying, I just want these parts, the things I know, the things I like, the things I've always worked with, rather than trying to go through a brand new catalog that has these products, but from vendors you don't know and you don't know where to find it. No surprise. There's so many people who would have known that. And the company was bleeding money because it was not meeting its procurement targets and volumes from these new contracts that it's put in place. Every company and organization has these dead bodies, and they were visible long before the end. There is things like roles that were never clearly defined, or regional strategies that openly clashed. Nobody named it until it was too late to matter. So, if you look at your organization, the vital sign is not whether the dead bodies exist. The vital sign is whether your culture makes it safe to name them. Because the ones that stay buried are the ones that eventually surface on their own. But by then, it might be kind of too late or a very inconvenient moment. So, 8 vital signs, 8 things to ask yourself about your business. Do you have too much heroics going on? Do you have too much friction? Do you have too many avoided conversations? When was the last time you had an outsider in? When was the last time you would willingly accepted an outsider in? The numbers versus the story you tell yourself. Do they still add up? Do you have a silent board or silence in your governance? Where is the health of your most critical partnerships? Are the communication lines open at the highest level? And what about the dead bodies? Do people bring them up, or are they hidden in the closets? How'd you do? On these 8 things, not in theory, not what you'd like the answer to be, but what's your actual honest answer to each of these questions right now? If you found yourself thinking, I'm not sure, or I would need to check, or actually, I've not really looked at any of that recently, that's not a failure. That is also information, right? And that's exactly the kind of information that is worth acting on before it becomes an emergency. This is what I mean when I talk about a business stress test. A business stress test is not an audit. It's not a health check. It's not a consultant arriving with a 100-slide framework. It's a structured conversation, periodically, with someone who's seen what organizational breakdown looks like, from the inside, across industries, internationally, at speed, and who can read your vital signs without a stake in making you feel good about the results. 100 episodes of this show have been about what happens when organizations wait too long. The patterns are consistent. Their signals are almost always there in advance. And the cost of catching them early is a fraction of the cost of catching them late. If any of what you heard today made you think, we should look at this, I would love to have that conversation. The link's in the show notes. It really just starts with a single call. No commitment, no pitch, just an honest look at what your vital signs are telling you. Thank you so much for 100 episodes. This show exists because the problems we talk about are real, and the leaders facing them deserve straight talk and practical tools. And that's what we keep doing. Thank you. I'd love to have you back on the next episode of the Business Emergency Room. Bye now. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.